This is the story of Mia Carter, a war veteran who came back home to Atlanta, hoping to rebuild her life after years of service. But one night, when she walks into a high-end restaurant proudly wearing her military uniform, she's met with cold rejection, dismissed as if her sacrifices meant nothing. That humiliating moment sparks a fire in Mia. She shares her story online, and it quickly goes viral, turning her fight into a national movement for respect and justice. As protests erupt and a tense legal battle unfolds, Mia becomes the voice for countless veterans facing similar struggles. But can she turn public support into real change? Or will the odds against her prove too much? Subscribe to follow Mia's inspiring journey and leave a comment. What would you do in her place? Don't miss out on this story of courage, resilience, and the power of standing up when no one else will. Mia Carter never thought she'd miss the dusty heat of the Middle East. It had been relentless and unforgiving, but there was a kind of clarity to those days. You knew your mission, knew what was at stake. Every sunrise was a gift. Every sunset a promise that you'd made it through another day. But now, back in Atlanta, Georgia, 36 years old and bearing the invisible scars of 2 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, Mia felt more uncertain than ever before. She lived alone in a small, modest apartment just off Piedmont Road, surrounded by the echoes of a life she could never quite leave behind. Framed medals hung on the wall, symbols of the courage and sacrifice that had earned her respect overseas. Her uniform, freshly pressed, always hung neatly in her closet, a reminder of the days when she felt like she belonged to something bigger than herself. It was a sharp contrast to the nights she now spent in silence, where the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional siren wailing through the city streets. Mia's days began before the sun rose, the habit of early mornings ingrained in her from years of strict military discipline. She jogged through the old neighborhood before dawn, her breath fogging in the crisp air, her footsteps echoing down the empty streets. It was the only time she felt truly at peace, just her and the rhythm of her heartbeat, the steady pace of her feet against the pavement. In those moments, she could almost forget the nightmares that sometimes clawed at her sleep, the images of explosions and the faces of friends she'd lost. After her run, she'd return to her apartment, make a simple breakfast, and prepare for her part-time job at the Atlanta Veterans Center. It wasn't much, but it gave her a purpose. Mia had become a counselor, listening to stories from other veterans, stories that mirrored her own struggles with adapting to a world that no longer felt familiar. Some of them came in angry, others numb, but Mia understood them in a way that no one else could. It made her feel useful again, like she was still making a difference, even if the battlefield had changed. But there were cracks in the facade. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who carried the weight of those years in the fine lines around her eyes, in the way her mouth set into a hard line when she thought no one was watching. She'd stopped speaking to most of her old friends, the ones who couldn't understand why she'd changed. Even her family seemed to walk on eggshells around her, unsure of how to reach the woman she'd become. Her mother, Carla, had tried to be supportive, offering to visit more often, but Mia had gently pushed her away, insisting that she needed to handle things on her own. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the effort. She just couldn't bear the pity she saw in Carla's eyes. It made her feel small, like a broken version of the daughter her mother remembered. And as for Derek, her younger brother, he'd stopped asking about her service altogether after a tense argument when she'd returned home. "You don't understand," she'd snapped at him, the bitterness lacing her voice. "You don't know what it's like out there." He'd retreated, hurt and confused, and she hadn't known how to bridge the gap since. So Mia continued on, moving through her routines like a soldier on autopilot. But as the months wore on, a restlessness began to gnaw at her. She longed for a connection to the city she had once called home, a way to feel like she was more than just a shadow among the living. That was what led her to make a decision one chilly Friday evening. Something as simple as treating herself to dinner at a restaurant she'd seen in passing, hoping for a brief moment of normalcy. It was early November, the air crisp with the promise of winter, when Mia decided to step outside of her usual routines. She had seen Jackson's Grill during one of her morning runs, an upscale restaurant in the heart of the Buckhead district, its polished windows glinting in the sunlight. It was the kind of place where families gathered to celebrate milestones and business deals were made over sizzling steaks. It wasn't somewhere she'd normally go, but she thought maybe, just maybe, she could find a sense of belonging there, even if just for an evening. She spent extra time getting ready that night, smoothing her hair back into a neat bun and carefully pinning on her medals. She chose to wear her uniform, not out of a desire for attention, but because it was the best she had. It made her feel confident, put together, like she could face whatever the evening might bring. As she glanced at her reflection in the mirror, she caught a glimpse of the person she used to be, before the war had taken so much from her. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel hopeful. The drive to Buckhead was a short one, but Mia's thoughts churned with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. She tried to push down the small voice in the back of her mind that warned her she might not fit in here, that this world of expensive drinks and white tablecloths wasn't for people like her. But she ignored it, focusing instead on the memory of her mother's voice telling her that she deserved a treat, that she deserved to feel special every once in a while. As she parked her car and walked towards the entrance, the golden lights of Jackson's Grill shone invitingly, casting a warm glow onto the sidewalk. She could see families and couples inside, laughing and sharing meals, and she let herself imagine, just for a moment, that she could be a part of that. But as soon as she stepped inside, the mood shifted. Conversations faltered, and heads turned towards her. At first, Mia thought they might be looking at her uniform with respect, but then she caught the looks in their eyes: curiosity, disdain, amusement. Her chest tightened as she heard snippets of whispered conversations. "Do you think she knows how much the steaks cost here?" "Probably looking for a free meal." Mia's jaw clenched, but she forced herself to keep walking towards the hostess stand, determined not to let the comments ruin her night. She reminded herself that she had faced far worse in the heat of battle, that she had survived ambushes and mortar fire. A few judgmental stares couldn't break her. The hostess, a young woman named Emily, barely glanced up from her reservation book when Mia approached. Her face was set in an expression of polite disinterest, and Mia had to clear her throat to get her attention. "Good evening," she said, managing a small smile. "Table for one, please." Emily finally looked up, her gaze flicking over Mia's uniform before settling on her face. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're fully booked tonight," she said, her voice as smooth as glass. Her smile was just a little too practiced, too tight, and Mia felt a prickle of unease. Mia glanced past the hostess's shoulder into the dining room. She could see half a dozen empty tables, their white linens gleaming under the warm lights. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice carefully. "I see some open spots. I don't mind waiting." Emily's smile grew colder, and she didn't bother to hide the irritation in her voice. "As I said, we're fully booked for the evening, and those tables are reserved for guests on our list." Mia felt a flare of anger, but she kept her expression neutral. "Could I be added to the list then?" "I'm willing to wait as long as it takes." Emily's lips twitched, and for a moment, Mia thought she might relent. But then the hostess shook her head. "I'm afraid our wait list is full as well, ma'am. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at another establishment down the street." Mia blinked, momentarily stunned by the dismissiveness in the young woman's tone. It wasn't just a refusal, it was a dismissal, a subtle suggestion that she didn't belong in a place like this. She felt her hands clench into fists at her sides, the muscles in her jaw tightening. 1,000 retorts flashed through her mind, but she swallowed them down, reminding herself that she was in uniform, that she had to hold herself to a higher standard. She took a step back, glancing around the restaurant one last time. The diners had returned to their conversations, but she could still feel their eyes on her, assessing her, judging her. She wondered if any of them would have cared enough to speak up, to challenge the hostess's decision. But their silence spoke louder than any words. Mia turned and walked back toward the door, her steps heavy, her vision blurring slightly with unshed tears. The cold air outside stung her cheeks as she stepped back onto the sidewalk, and she paused, taking a shaky breath. She could feel the weight of humiliation pressing down on her, mingling with the old familiar ache of being alone in a crowd. She knew she could leave, could put this place behind her, and try to forget how small it had made her feel. But a stubborn part of her refused to let it go. She'd fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to let herself be treated like this without standing up for herself. She needed to do something, even if she wasn't quite sure what that was yet. Mia's decision to turn back was almost instinctual, a spark of defiance flaring to life inside her. She turned on her heel and walked back through the front door, the warmth of the restaurant washing over her like a wave. This time, the conversations truly stopped, heads turning to follow her as she made her way back to the hostess stand. Emily's smile faltered when she saw Mia return, and her eyes widened with a flicker of annoyance. "I'd like to speak to your manager," Mia said, her voice calm but firm. She could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up her neck, but she forced herself to stand straight, to hold her ground. Emily hesitated, her lips parting as if she might protest, but then she glanced at the diners staring openly now, and she nodded tightly. "One moment, please." She disappeared behind the reservation desk, leaving Mia to stand there, alone in the middle of the restaurant's entryway, with every eye in the room on her. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity, and Mia could feel her confidence wavering. She glanced down at her uniform, suddenly self-conscious about the medals pinned to her chest, the patches on her sleeves. But before she could second-guess herself, a man's voice cut through the murmur of the room. "I understand there's an issue here." Lucas Hill, the restaurant manager, was a tall man with graying hair and an air of smug superiority. He approached with a slight smirk, his hands tucked into the pockets of his expensive suit. His eyes flicked dismissively over Mia's uniform before he focused on her face, his expression unreadable. Mia took a deep breath, steadying herself before she spoke. "Yes, I'm having a hard time understanding why I was told there are no tables available when I can see several empty ones." Lucas raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening slightly. "I'm afraid that's not really your concern, is it? We have standards here, and it's my job to ensure that our guests receive the best experience possible." He spoke slowly, as if explaining something to a child, and Mia felt a flush of anger creep up her spine. "Are you saying I don't meet those standards?" she asked, her voice tightening despite her efforts to keep it level. "Is that why I'm not welcome here?" Lucas's smile didn't waver, but his eyes grew colder. "I'm saying that we reserve the right to serve the guests who best fit our establishment. I'm sure you'd be more comfortable at a different restaurant, somewhere that might suit your needs better." The insinuation hung in the air like smoke, and Mia felt the weight of it settle over her. The word different stung more than she cared to admit, and she could hear the low murmur of approval from a nearby table, the subtle shift in the crowd's attitude. She had felt this kind of disdain before, but never so openly, never so brazenly. Mia's pulse pounded in her ears, but she forced herself to keep her voice steady. "I served this country for over a decade. I fought for the freedom to walk into a place like this without being judged. Is that too much to ask?" Lucas's smile slipped, and for a moment Mia thought she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his expression, but then he squared his shoulders, his smirk returning. "That uniform doesn't entitle you to anything here, Miss Carter. Now, I suggest you leave before I have to call security." The words struck her like a physical blow, and Mia felt her composure fracture. She had been trained to face enemies in the heat of battle, to stand tall even in the face of chaos. But this, being humiliated in front of a crowd of strangers, treated like an inconvenience in the country she had fought to protect, was a different kind of pain. It reached into her chest and twisted, leaving her breathless. For a moment she considered lashing out, raising her voice, demanding to be treated with respect. But she knew that would only confirm the judgments in their eyes, that it would give Lucas and his staff the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. Instead, she swallowed her pride, turned on her heel, and walked back out of the restaurant, her fists clenched so tightly that her nails bit into her palms. As she stepped into the night air, the cold wind stung her cheeks, mingling with the hot, bitter tears that she had kept at bay inside. But this wasn't over. Mia knew she couldn't let it end like this, with her walking away in silence. She just needed to figure out how to turn the pain in her chest into something that would make them listen. Mia drove home with her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The night outside her car windows was dark and cold, the Atlanta streets eerily quiet at this hour. But inside her chest, a storm was raging, a mix of humiliation and anger that she couldn't seem to control. She replayed every detail of what had happened at Jackson's Grill, the manager's smirk, the dismissive glances from other diners, the stinging rejection that made her feel like an outsider in the very country she had fought to protect. When she finally reached her apartment, she parked but didn't get out of the car right away. Instead, she sat there, staring blankly through the windshield, the events of the night swirling through her mind. She thought about her comrades who never made it back, those who would never have a chance to live a quiet evening, let alone face the kind of disrespect she had just endured. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. And yet it was happening, not on a battlefield, but here, at home. Mia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, anger giving way to a raw, simmering determination. She knew that walking back into the restaurant and causing a scene wouldn't change anything. It would only make her the villain in their eyes. But there had to be a way to make them see the truth of what they had done, to make them understand the pain and disrespect they had inflicted. She reached for her phone, the thought forming in her mind before she fully realized it. Opening her social media apps, she typed out a post, recounting the events of the evening in careful detail. Her words came out raw and unfiltered, laced with the emotions she had tried to keep hidden inside the restaurant. Tonight, I walked into Jackson's Grill in my uniform, proud of my service to this country. I was told I wasn't the right fit for their restaurant. This is what it feels like to serve, only to come home and be treated like you don't belong. If you think this kind of discrimination doesn't exist in 2024, think again. She attached photos she had snapped on her phone, images of the empty tables inside the restaurant, the smug look on the manager's face, and a selfie she took outside, her uniform visible in the dim light of the parking lot. She tagged the restaurant's official account, knowing it would be impossible for them to ignore. Then she paused, her thumb hovering over the post button. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if people thought she was overreacting? What if they accused her of seeking attention? But then she remembered the sneering voice of the manager, the way he had dismissed her service as if it meant nothing. She pressed post and watched as the message went live. Mia leaned back against the headrest, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what would come next, but she knew she couldn't take it back. She didn't want to. This time she wasn't going to let herself be silenced. By the time Mia woke up the next morning, her phone was vibrating constantly with notifications. She blinked blearily at the screen, trying to make sense of the flood of messages, retweets, and comments. Her post had gone viral overnight, reaching far beyond her usual circle of friends and followers. Thousands of people shared it, expressing their outrage, their disbelief, and their support. The hashtag #sign Honor Mia had begun trending, and veterans groups from across the country were rallying around her story. Mia sat up in bed, her heart racing as she scrolled through the responses. Messages poured in from strangers who shared their own experiences of discrimination, their own struggles to adjust after returning home. "Thank you for speaking out," one message read. "I've been in your shoes and it's time people knew what we go through." Another veteran wrote, "You're not alone, Mia. We're with you." The support gave Mia a sense of validation she hadn't felt in a long time, a reminder that her voice mattered. But as she continued to read, she found comments that cut in a different way. Some people accused her of trying to ruin a business over a misunderstanding. "This is what happens when people think they're entitled because they served," one comment read. Another accused her of being overly dramatic, of seeking attention by playing the victim. Mia's hands tightened around her phone as she read the words, the familiar sting of doubt gnawing at her resolve. But then she remembered the quiet humiliation of standing outside that restaurant, the anger that had propelled her to speak up in the first place. She knew the truth of what she had experienced, and she refused to let anyone make her feel small again. Her post continued to spread throughout the day, catching the attention of local news outlets. Reporters began reaching out, asking for interviews, wanting to hear her side of the story. She hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted to put herself in the spotlight. But then she thought about the veterans who had reached out to her, the ones who felt invisible, and she knew she couldn't back down now. Mia agreed to a live interview with WATL News, a popular Atlanta news station. She arrived at the studio that afternoon, feeling the nerves churn in her stomach as she walked past cameras and lighting equipment. A producer guided her to a chair in front of a backdrop, adjusting her microphone while the anchor, Rebecca Mills, greeted her with a firm handshake. As the cameras started rolling, Rebecca introduced the segment, summarizing Mia's post and the firestorm it had sparked. Then she turned to Mia, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. Mia, can you tell us what happened at Jackson's Grill and why you decided to share your story online? Mia took a breath, steadying herself before she began to speak. She described the events of the previous night, the cold dismissal from the hostess, the cutting words from the manager. She spoke about what it felt like to wear a uniform that had once been a source of pride, only to have it met with disdain. Her voice shook at first, but it grew steadier as she spoke, gaining strength from the anger and hurt that simmered just beneath the surface. This isn't just about one restaurant, Mia said, her gaze locking onto the camera. It's about how we treat those who've served, about the way some people see a uniform and think it makes us different, lesser. We deserve better than that, and I'm not going to stay silent about it. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully, her expression softening as she listened. You've become a voice for a lot of veterans who feel the same way, Mia. What do you hope will come out of this? Mia hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I hope that people realize this isn't an isolated incident. It's a reminder that respect has to be more than just words. It's how we treat each other, how we see each other. And I hope that businesses like Jackson's Grill learn that their actions have consequences. When the interview aired that evening, it quickly became a talking point across social media and news channels. Clips of Mia's words circulated widely, resonating with those who had experienced similar treatment and those who simply believed in the cause. The backlash against Jackson's Grill intensified, with negative reviews flooding their online profiles and people calling for a boycott. The restaurant's management released a brief statement, denying any wrongdoing and insisting that the incident had been misinterpreted, but their words fell on deaf ears. Mia watched it all unfold with a mix of satisfaction and anxiety. The attention was overwhelming, but it felt like a validation of everything she had endured, a chance to turn her pain into something meaningful. 2 days after Mia's story aired on WATL News, a group of veterans from the Atlanta area organized a peaceful protest outside Jackson's Grill. Word spread through social media, and by noon a crowd had gathered in front of the restaurant. Veterans in their uniforms, families with children, local activists carrying signs that read, "Veterans deserve respect and no room for discrimination in our city." Mia arrived at the scene late in the morning, her breath catching as she took in the sight. She hadn't expected this. Dozens of people standing together, their voices raised in solidarity, their presence sending a message that couldn't be ignored. A few of the protesters recognized her as she approached, offering her nods of respect, a few even thanking her for speaking out. She found herself standing beside Tom Jenkins, a retired Marine who had visited the Veterans Center a few times. He handed her a sign that read, "United for Justice." Mia accepted it, feeling a lump rise in her throat as she joined the chanting voices. The protest drew the attention of local news stations, and soon reporters and camera crews swarmed the scene. Mia watched as they interviewed veterans who shared their own stories of discrimination, each one adding to the weight of the issue she had brought to light. Her story had become a rallying cry, a symbol of a larger struggle that went beyond one night at a restaurant. As the hours passed, the crowd outside Jackson's Grill only grew. Inside, Mia could see the restaurant's staff peeking out from behind the curtains, their expressions a mix of frustration and fear. She caught a glimpse of Lucas Hill, the manager, pacing behind the glass doors, his face pale and tense. For a moment, their eyes met, and Mia saw a flash of something that might have been regret, but she couldn't be sure. That evening, as news coverage of the protest played on television screens across the city, Mia felt a surge of hope. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about a community that refused to be silent, about people standing together to demand the respect they deserved. That night, after the protest had ended and the crowds dispersed, Mia sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the quiet hum of her apartment. Her phone buzzed with messages from supporters, some offering to donate to a legal fund if she chose to pursue further action. It was then that she received a call from James Parker, a lawyer who had seen her story on the news. James was a veteran himself, having served in the Navy before attending law school, and his voice carried a warmth that immediately put Mia at ease. "Mia, I saw your interview and I want to help," he said, I think you have a strong case for discrimination, and I'd be honored to represent you if you decide to take this to court. Mia hesitated, unsure if she wanted to escalate things that far. The idea of a lawsuit felt daunting, like a battle she might not be prepared for. But then she thought about the veterans who had stood beside her, the ones who had thanked her for speaking out. She thought about the anger that still simmered in her chest and the need for justice that wouldn't be satisfied with a simple apology. I appreciate the offer, James, she said, her voice steady. Let's do it. Let's make sure they're held accountable. Over the next few weeks, Mia worked closely with James, gathering evidence, preparing her case, and revisiting the details of that night at Jackson's Grill. The process was exhausting, emotionally draining, but every time she felt her resolve waver, she reminded herself of why she had started this fight in the first place. James filed the lawsuit, accusing Jackson's Grill of discriminatory practices and seeking damages for the emotional distress Mia had suffered. When the news broke, it reignited the media storm, drawing even more attention to Mia's story. Jackson's Grill's management issued a statement, claiming that they would fight the charges in court, but their words sounded hollow in the face of the evidence. As the trial date approached, Mia felt a mix of dread and anticipation. She knew that the courtroom would be a new kind of battlefield, but she was ready to face it head-on. She had fought too hard to turn back now, and she was determined to see this through to the end. Mia arrived at James Parker's office for their first in-depth meeting about the lawsuit. It was a small space in a brick building downtown, lined with framed photographs of Navy ships and certificates that attested to James's accomplishments. The air was filled with the scent of old leather and fresh coffee, and the afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the desk. James greeted her with a firm handshake and a smile that was both reassuring and earnest. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his manner confident but not arrogant. Mia noticed the small lapel pin on his jacket, a gold anchor, the symbol of his Navy service. It reminded her that, unlike most of the people she had dealt with recently, James understood the weight of what she was fighting for. "Let's get to work, Mia," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I've gone through the details of your case, and I think we've got a real chance here. But it won't be easy. They're going to try to paint you as unstable, maybe even say you're just looking for a payout. We need to be ready for whatever they throw at us." Mia nodded, taking a seat across from him. She'd expected as much. "I don't care about the money, James. This is about making them understand that what they did was wrong. I want them to know they can't treat people this way and get away with it." James gave her an approving nod. "Good. That'll help us a lot if this goes to trial. But first, we need to gather more evidence. You mentioned that some people inside the restaurant seemed to notice what was going on. If we can find a witness willing to speak out, it could strengthen our case." They spent the next few hours reviewing every detail of the night at Jackson's Grill, from the moment Mia had walked through the doors to the way Lucas Hill had dismissed her. Mia's hands shook as she recounted the humiliation, the way she had felt stripped of her dignity. But as she spoke, she felt a sense of catharsis, as if finally putting the story into words was helping her regain some control over it. James took meticulous notes, asking questions and offering reassurance whenever Mia faltered. "We're going to fight this, Mia," he said at the end of their meeting, "and we're going to make sure that your voice is heard." Before leaving, Mia caught sight of a photograph on James's desk, a group of sailors standing on a ship deck, their arms slung around each other's shoulders. It reminded her of the camaraderie she had felt in the military, the sense of having people who had their backs, no matter what. As she shook James's hand goodbye, she felt a spark of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to fight this battle alone. The day of the first court hearing dawned cold and gray, with clouds hanging low over the city like a shroud. Mia arrived at the courthouse early, feeling the familiar, jittery tension that she used to get before a mission. She wore a simple blouse and blazer, but she tucked a small American flag pin into her lapel, a quiet reminder of everything she had fought for, both overseas and here at home. James met her on the courthouse steps, his expression serious but calm. "Remember, today's just a preliminary hearing. The goal is to show that your claims have merit and that this deserves to go to trial. Stay calm, be honest, and don't let their lawyer get under your skin." Mia nodded, though her nerves buzzed like live wires. I'll try. Thanks, James. They entered the courtroom together, where the seats were already filling with reporters, curious citizens, and a few familiar faces from the protest. Mia spotted Tom Jenkins in the back row, giving her a supportive thumbs up, and she felt a small surge of comfort. She took her place beside James, trying to focus on her breathing as the judge entered and called the session to order. Across the room, Lucas Hill sat with his own lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire Morton. Claire radiated a kind of practiced coolness, the kind Mia had seen on officers who thought they were invincible. She barely glanced at Mia, focusing instead on her notes with a look of detached disinterest. But Mia could feel the weight of judgment in her presence, the unspoken accusation that she was exaggerating, overreacting. The first part of the hearing was procedural, with both sides presenting their arguments for why the case should or shouldn't proceed to trial. James laid out the details of the incident, emphasizing the discrimination and emotional harm Mia had suffered. He highlighted her military service, her record of community involvement, and the evidence she had gathered from that night. But when Claire stood up to speak, her approach was icy and cutting. This case is nothing more than a desperate attempt to smear the reputation of a respected business, she said, her voice carrying across the courtroom. Ms. Carter's claims are based on subjective interpretations and a misunderstanding of how our establishment operates. She was treated with the same standards as any other guest. To suggest otherwise is not only unfair, but an insult to our client's character. Mia's hands tightened around the edge of the table, her pulse quickening with anger, but she forced herself to stay quiet, focusing on James's calm expression as he took notes. He had warned her that they would try to make it sound like she was the problem, that they would use every tactic to undermine her credibility. The judge listened attentively, then asked both lawyers a series of pointed questions. When he turned to Mia, his gaze softened slightly. Miss Carter, can you tell me in your own words why you believe this case should go to trial? Mia took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of the courtroom on her. She remembered James's advice, to speak honestly, to stay true to what she believed. Your Honor, I'm not here because I want to ruin anyone's business. I'm here because what happened that night at Jackson's Grill wasn't right. They looked at me, in my uniform, and they decided I didn't belong. They made me feel like I wasn't worth a place at their table, like everything I'd sacrificed for this country didn't matter. And I think that's something worth standing up for. The judge studied her for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, Miss Carter. As the hearing concluded, Mia felt a small flicker of hope. The judge had not made a final ruling, but she sensed that he was taking her claims seriously. Outside the courthouse, she was met by a swarm of reporters, their cameras flashing as they peppered her with questions. She answered a few, careful not to say anything that might be twisted against her later. James pulled her aside, away from the cameras, and gave her a reassuring smile. You did great in there, Mia. Now we wait for the judge's decision. But no matter what happens, I'm proud of you for standing up. Mia nodded, feeling a lump rise in her throat. Thank you, James, for believing in me. A week after the hearing, the judge's decision came down. Mia's case would proceed to trial. It was a small but significant victory, and it sent a new wave of energy through the veterans community and Mia's supporters. News outlets picked up the story again, framing it as a showdown between a single veteran standing up for her rights and a powerful business with deep pockets. But Jackson's Grill and their legal team did not back down. Instead, they shifted their strategy, launching a public relations campaign aimed at discrediting Mia and painting themselves as the real victims of a media witch hunt. They released carefully edited surveillance footage from the night of the incident, showing Mia's confrontation with the hostess, but conveniently cutting out the parts where Lucas Hill had spoken to her. The video was framed with commentary suggesting that Mia had been aggressive and unreasonable. Mia watched the coverage with a sinking feeling in her chest. The edited footage spread quickly online, and within hours she found herself facing a new wave of backlash. She's just trying to get money out of them, some of the comments read. This is why you can't believe everything you see on social media. She felt the doubt creep back in. That old voice whispering that maybe she should have just walked away kept her head down. But then she looked at the messages that continued to pour in from veterans and supporters, people who had been inspired by her stand. She thought of the protest outside Jackson's Grill, the way those veterans had stood with her in the cold, their voices raised for justice. It was time to remind them why she had started this fight. That evening, Mia posted a video on her social media, speaking directly into the camera. Her voice was steady, but there was a fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "They're trying to make me look like the villain," she said, holding up the edited footage for the camera. "But I know what happened that night, and so do they. This is about more than just one dinner. It's about making sure no one is treated like they don't belong, no matter who they are or what they've been through. I'm not backing down." Her video went viral within hours, resonating with those who saw through the restaurant's attempts to shift the blame. Prominent civil rights leaders like Angela Brooks shared her message, using their platforms to call out Jackson's Grill's tactics. Even a few celebrities chimed in, lending their voices to Mia's cause. The backlash against the restaurant grew, and their efforts to control the narrative began to crumble. The public's support swung back in Mia's favor, and her case became a rallying point for those who believed in fighting against discrimination and standing up for one's rights. As the trial date loomed closer, Mia felt a new sense of resolve harden inside her. The road ahead would be long and grueling, but she knew now that she wasn't walking it alone. She had a community behind her, a purpose driving her forward, and the knowledge that what she was doing mattered. She thought back to her time in the military, the moments when everything seemed hopeless, but you kept fighting anyway, because giving up was never an option. This was just another mission, another battle that needed to be won, and she would see it through, no matter the cost. The morning of the trial was colder than usual for early December, the sky a dull gray as Mia Carter walked up the steps of the courthouse. The air felt sharp, and each breath misted in the air before her. The tension buzzed beneath her skin, a mix of nerves and determination that she hadn't felt since her first deployment. Today wasn't just about her, it was about every veteran who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong in the country they had served. James Parker walked beside her, his expression serious but supportive. "You ready, Mia?" he asked as they reached the courthouse doors, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. Mia took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Ready as I'll ever be," she replied, her voice steady. She glanced back at the crowd gathered outside, reporters, veterans, and supporters who had shown up despite the chill in the air. Among them, she saw Tom Jenkins holding a sign that read, "Justice for Mia, justice for all," and she gave him a small nod of gratitude. As they stepped inside, Mia couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters sat with their notebooks ready, and the rows behind them were filled with spectators, some curious, others angry, many there to show their support. Lucas Hill sat at the defensive table with Claire Morton, looking composed, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. He didn't look at Mia as she walked past. James took his place beside Mia, setting out his notes and adjusting his tie. "Remember, Mia," he whispered, "speak your truth. No matter what they throw at you, don't let them shake your resolve." The trial began with the opening statements. Claire Morton spoke first, her tone measured and polished as she painted Mia as an overly sensitive veteran, claiming that the restaurant had done nothing wrong. "This is a case of misunderstanding. Nothing more," she said, turning to the jury with a sympathetic smile. "My client, Jackson's Grill, has always strived to welcome all customers, regardless of their background or status. We ask the jury to recognize this for what it is, a situation blown out of proportion." James stood to deliver his statement next. His voice was calm but carried a steel edge that resonated through the room. "This is not about a misunderstanding, but about a pattern of behavior that reflects a lack of respect for those who have served this country. Mia Carter walked into that restaurant expecting to be treated like any other American, but instead, she was judged, dismissed, and humiliated simply because she was different." He glanced at Mia, then went back to the jury. "We will show today that what happened at Jackson's Grill wasn't just a one-time incident. It was a reflection of deeper prejudices that no one, especially those who have sacrificed for their country, should have to endure." The first few witnesses were staff members from Jackson's Grill, all of whom insisted that Mia had been treated fairly. Claire guided them through their rehearsed testimonies, emphasizing the restaurant's supposed commitment to customer service. But when it came time for cross-examination, James dismantled their statements piece by piece, highlighting inconsistencies in their stories and pushing them to admit that the restaurant had never been full that night, as they had originally claimed. When Lucas Hill took the stand, his demeanor was confident, but there was a nervous edge to his voice as he recounted his version of events. He avoided looking at Mia, focusing instead on the jury as he insisted that he had acted professionally. "I never intended to offend Miss Carter," he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "I simply suggested that she might find a different establishment more to her liking." James stepped forward for the cross-examination, his expression cool and unyielding. "Mr. Hill, do you often suggest to customers that they might be more comfortable elsewhere?" Lucas hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Only when it's clear that they're not satisfied with our establishment's atmosphere." "And what was it about Miss Carter's presence that led you to believe she wouldn't be satisfied?" James pressed, his voice sharpening. "Was it her uniform, her medals, or perhaps the fact that she was alone?" Lucas shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. I don't think that's relevant." "It's absolutely relevant, Mr. Hill. You made a judgment about a veteran who served her country because she didn't fit your idea of what a suitable customer looks like." James's voice rose slightly, his words cutting through the courtroom silence. "And that judgment cost her her dignity. That's why we're here today." The moment had come for Mia to take the stand. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the armrests of the witness chair, but she willed herself to stay calm. She glanced at the jury, trying to find the words that would make them understand the pain she had felt, the deep sense of betrayal. James guided her through the early questions, her military service, her background, the events of the night at Jackson's Grill. She spoke with honesty, describing how proud she had felt walking into that restaurant and how quickly that pride had been stripped away. She spoke about the way the whispers had cut into her, how Lucas Hill's words had made her feel like she was less than human. "Why did you decide to speak out, Miss Carter?" James asked, his voice gentle. "Why not just let it go?" Mia swallowed hard, her gaze turning inward for a moment before she looked back at the jury. "I spent over a decade fighting for this country, for the freedoms we all take for granted. When I came back, I thought those sacrifices meant something. But that night, standing outside Jackson's Grill, I realized that to some people, they don't. And I couldn't just walk away from that. I had to make them see what they were doing, not just to me, but to every veteran who comes home and finds that they don't have a place anymore." Her voice cracked with emotion, but she pressed on, the words coming faster now. "I didn't ask to be treated like a hero. I just wanted to be treated like a human being. And I don't think that's too much to ask." There was silence in the courtroom after she finished speaking, a heavy pause as the weight of her words settled over the room. For a moment, Mia thought she saw a flicker of sympathy in the eyes of one of the jurors, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and a pinched expression. Then it was Claire's turn to cross-examine, and the moment shifted. Claire's questions were cold, pointed, designed to rattle Mia and undermine her story. She tried to paint Mia as someone who had overreacted, someone who was using her status as a veteran to manipulate the narrative. "Miss Carter, would you agree that you've struggled with adjusting to civilian life?" Mia tensed, but she nodded. "Yes, I've struggled, but that doesn't make what happened to me any less real." Claire's eyes narrowed. "And would you also agree that you've experienced symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder since your return from service?" Mia felt her pulse quicken, the familiar flush of frustration rising in her chest. "I have PTSD, yes, but that doesn't mean I can't recognize when I'm being treated unfairly." Claire's smile was thin, calculated. "Or perhaps you misinterpreted the situation that night because of your condition?" James was on his feet in an instant. "Objection, Your Honor. This line of questioning is irrelevant to the events in question." The judge nodded firmly. "Sustained. Move on." Miss Morton Claire reluctantly changed her approach, but Mia could feel the damage the question had done, the seed of doubt planted in the minds of some jurors. She forced herself to keep her head high, to meet their gazes squarely, even as Claire tried to poke holes in her story. When Mia finally stepped down from the stand, she felt drained, as if she had left a piece of herself behind in that chair. James gave her a brief nod of encouragement, but she could see the tension in his face, the unspoken worry that they still had a fight ahead of them. The trial stretched on for days, with each side presenting witnesses, evidence, and arguments. Outside the courthouse, the media continued to swirl, reporters eagerly capturing every new development. The community remained divided. Some rallied behind Mia, while others questioned whether she was making too much of a single incident. Mia tried to shut out the noise, focusing on the faces of the veterans who came to the courthouse every day, offering her words of encouragement as she walked in. They reminded her of what she was fighting for, even when the outcome seemed uncertain. When the jury finally retired to deliberate, the waiting felt like a new kind of torture. Hours stretched into a full day, and then another as Mia tried to occupy herself in the small courthouse cafeteria, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring at the clock on the wall. James stayed with her, offering quiet reassurances that she wasn't sure she believed. But on the third day the word came. The jury had reached a decision. Mia's heart hammered in her chest as she returned to the courtroom, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. The judge's expression was unreadable as he took his seat, and Mia's mouth went dry as the jury foreperson stood, holding a slip of paper in her hands. The foreperson cleared her throat, glancing at the paper before looking up at the courtroom. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Mia Carter, and award damages in the amount of $250,000. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, and Mia's breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to spin around her as she tried to process the words. She felt James's hand squeeze her shoulder, his voice low in her ear. "We did it, Mia." Across the room, Lucas Hill's face had gone pale, and Claire Morton's carefully composed mask had cracked, revealing a flash of anger. But Mia barely registered their reactions. She turned to face the gallery, her eyes searching for the veterans who had stood by her throughout the trial. She saw Tom Jenkins, his face breaking into a wide smile, and she felt the burn of tears in her eyes. The reporters surged forward, eager to capture the moment, but all Mia could hear was the pounding of her own heart, the rush of relief that flooded her senses. It was over. She had won. Outside the courthouse, Mia was met by a cheering crowd of supporters. She blinked against the flash of cameras, her cheeks wet with tears she hadn't even realized she was shedding. Tom pulled her into a hug, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it, Mia. You stood up, and you made them listen." Mia hugged him back, the weight of the past year lifting from her shoulders like a heavy pack finally set down. She turned to the crowd, raising a hand in thanks. "This isn't just my victory," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "It's for every veteran who's ever felt like they didn't have a place. We deserve to be treated with respect. All of us." The crowd erupted into applause, and Mia felt a surge of pride unlike anything she had known before. It wasn't the pride of a soldier finishing a mission, but the pride of knowing that she had helped build something bigger than herself. She had turned her pain into change, and now there was no going back. The first National Valor Alliance gathering had drawn in veterans from every corner of the country. The conference center bustled with life as people moved between workshops, resource tables, and small group discussions. Mia walked through the hallways, pausing to shake hands, listen to stories, and offer encouragement to those who had come to be part of this growing movement. As she moved through the crowd, she spotted a man sitting quietly at a table near the back, his hands clasped around a paper coffee cup. He wore a worn army jacket, and his face was lined with the same kind of pain that Mia had seen in her own reflection countless times before. She made her way over, offering him a small smile as she approached. "Mind if I join you?" she asked gently, pulling out a chair. The man looked up, startled, but then he nodded, managing a faint smile. "You're Mia Carter, aren't you? The one who fought Jackson's Grill?" Mia nodded, settling into the chair beside him. "That's right. But today, I'm just here to listen. What's your name?" "Caleb," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Caleb Price. I served in the Army too. Got back a couple of years ago, but it's been hard. I didn't think anyone cared, you know? But I saw your story, and I thought maybe it wasn't too late for me." Mia's heart ached at the familiar loneliness in his voice, but she reached out to clasp his hand, her grip firm. "It's never too late, Caleb," she said, her voice steady. "That's what we're building here. A place where you're seen, where you're heard. You're not alone anymore. Caleb's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and he nodded, squeezing her hand back. Thank you, he whispered, for standing up when the rest of us couldn't. Mia sat with him for a while, sharing stories about their time in service and the struggles they faced after returning home. She told him about the days when she thought no one would ever understand, about the fear that speaking out might make things worse, and she told him how she had learned that sometimes standing up wasn't just about yourself. It was about creating space for others to find their own strength. As they talked, Mia saw a small spark of hope come alive in Caleb's eyes, and she felt a surge of gratitude for the path she had chosen. It was moments like this, small but profound, that reminded her of why she had fought so hard. After the conference concluded, Mia stood in the quiet lobby, watching as people slowly filtered out of the building. The banners that had adorned the walls now hung in tatters, ready to be packed away for the next event. But the spirit of the gathering lingered in the air, a tangible sense of possibility. Angela Brooks approached her, carrying a thick folder filled with notes and ideas. We've got some promising partnerships coming out of this, Angela said, her voice bright with enthusiasm. Several companies want to work with us on job training programs for veterans, and I've got a few local leaders who are interested in hosting more community events. This is going to be big, Mia. Mia took the folder, glancing through the neatly organized papers. She felt a sense of pride settle deep in her chest. It's more than I ever imagined, Angela, and I know we can make it even bigger. Angela smiled, her expression turning thoughtful. You know, when you first walked into my office asking for help, I wasn't sure what to expect. But I've seen you grow into a leader, Mia. You've become a voice for people who thought they'd never be heard. Mia looked out at the setting sun, the golden light streaming through the glass doors. She thought of all the work still ahead, the expansion plans for Valor Alliance, the new branches opening in cities like Chicago and Dallas, the legislative initiatives they hoped to push through to protect veterans' rights. It was daunting, but it was a challenge she was eager to embrace. Thank you, Angela, she said softly. I wouldn't have gotten here without you, and without everyone who believed in what we're doing. I just hope I can live up to their expectations. Angela placed a hand on Mia's shoulder, giving her a reassuring squeeze. You already have, Mia, and I have no doubt that you'll keep doing it. They stood together in the fading light, the sense of accomplishment shared between them. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but filled with promise. And Mia knew that whatever came next, she would face it head on, just as she always had. That night back in her apartment, Mia sat at her desk, surrounded by the silence that had once felt so heavy, but now carried a sense of comfort. She reached for the stack of letters that she had brought back from the Valor Alliance event, deciding to read through a few before bed. Each letter was a reminder of how far she had come, how the ripples of her actions had reached people she might never meet in person. One letter, written in shaky handwriting, caught her eye. It was from a woman named Sarah, whose husband had served in the Marines and had struggled to find steady work since returning home. Mia's eyes scanned the page, taking in the heartfelt words. Dear Mia, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to thank you. My husband, Paul, used to think he wasn't worth anything after he came back. But when he saw you on the news, fighting for people like him, it gave him hope again. He reached out to Valor Alliance, and now he's got a new job, and he's starting to believe in himself again. I don't know what we would have done without you. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. Mia felt a lump rise in her throat as she read the words, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. She thought of all the sleepless nights, the moments when she had questioned whether it was worth it to keep fighting. But then she thought of Paul, of Sarah, of the countless others who had found hope through Valor Alliance, and she knew that every hardship had been worth it. She picked up a pen, jotting down a quick reply on Valor Alliance stationery. Sarah, thank you for your kind words. Your letter means more to me than you can know. Please tell Paul that he's not alone and that we're proud to have him as part of our community. Wishing you both strength and peace. Mia Carter. As she sealed the envelope, she glanced at the photo of her old unit on her desk, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. It felt like she was finally repaying a debt she had carried with her for years, finding a way to honor the friends she had lost and the sacrifices they had made. Mia stepped out onto her balcony, the cool night air brushing against her face. She looked up at the stars, the same ones she had stared at on so many sleepless nights overseas, wondering if she would ever make it back home. Tonight, they seemed to shine a little brighter, casting their light across the city that had become her battlefield and her sanctuary. She thought back to that night outside Jackson's Grill, the sting of rejection that had pushed her to fight. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it had set her on a path she would never have imagined. A path that had been filled with pain, but also with a kind of healing she had thought she would never find. The door to the balcony creaked open, and Tom Jenkins joined her, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He handed one to Mia, settling into the chair beside her. "Thought you might want some company," he said, taking a sip. "Big day, huh?" Mia smiled, accepting the warmth of the mug in her hands. "Yeah, big day," she agreed, her voice filled with a quiet sense of satisfaction. "It's still hard to believe how much has changed in a year." Tom nodded, looking out at the lights of Atlanta stretching out before them. "You know, I always thought we were supposed to put the battles behind us when we came home. But you have found a way to keep fighting, even when the rest of us were ready to give up. And look at what you've done." Mia glanced sideways at him, seeing the pride in his expression. "I couldn't have done it alone, Tom. None of this would have been possible without you, without everyone who believed in this cause." Tom raised his mug in a toast, his smile widening. "To Valor Alliance, and to you, Mia. Here's to all the battles yet to come." Mia clinked her mug against his, feeling a warmth that went beyond the coffee. They sat in companionable silence, watching the city move beneath the stars, the world around them filled with both the promise of tomorrow and the weight of everything they had overcome. As the night deepened, Mia leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes and letting herself savor the peace she had fought so hard to find. The future was still uncertain, still filled with challenges she couldn't foresee, but she knew that for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it, with friends at her side and the strength of a community behind her. And as the stars twinkled overhead, Mia felt a sense of hope that carried her through the night, guiding her towards whatever came next. As Mia and Tom sat on the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer beneath the night sky, she thought back to how much had changed over the past year. From that cold night outside Jackson's Grill to this moment of quiet satisfaction, the journey had been long, but worth every step. She leaned forward, a new thought crossing her mind. "You know, Tom, a lot of people have been following this journey. I never imagined it would reach so many, but their support is what kept me going." Tom nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, there's a lot of folks out there who've been inspired by your story, Mia. You should give them a shout out. Let them know how much it means." Mia grinned and took out her phone, recording a short video against the backdrop of the Atlanta skyline. "Hey everyone, it's Mia here," she began, her voice warm and genuine. "I just wanted to thank all of you for standing with me through this journey. Your support helped turn a moment of struggle into a movement of change, and I couldn't have done it without you." She paused, glancing at Tom, who gave her a thumbs up. "If you believe in what we're doing here with Valor Alliance, and if you want to hear more about the fight for justice and respect, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it helps us keep this mission going. Together, we can make sure that no one ever feels alone. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next update." She ended the recording, feeling a sense of fulfillment as she sent it out into the world. Tom clinked his coffee mug against hers, his smile widened. "There you go, Mia. A call to action, straight from the heart." Mia leaned back, letting the moment settle over her. She didn't know how many would subscribe or where this path would take her next, but she knew one thing for sure. Every story, every voice mattered. And as long as people kept listening, she would keep fighting.